Before we begin, I'd like us to watch this brief film together to provide some context for our discussion.
I'm a visual artist, mixed media, originally from Louisville, Kentucky. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Louisville and graduate work at Pratt and continued at School of Visual Art and Parsons. One of my blessings was the fact that I had some very, very good people that came around about the time as I did. Sam Gilliam, Bob Thompson, Ed Hamilton, Ken Young, and Dr. Robert Douglas, who got his doctorate in art history, as well as being a painter. I think of myself as a people artist. I use figures as a way of expressing a feeling, a political or social or religious issue, a speaker for certain concerns that we have as a human condition. I discovered an artist by the name of Charles White. I thought he was one of the finest artists that I'd witnessed, and I admired the power that he got in his figures, the voice, the character, the insight. And I said, well, if Mr. White has the power, I'm going to shoot for something different. I want the sensitivity of the individual. I often think of myself as being similar to a director of a movie, trying to find the right persona, the right personality, the right body style for a given role. What expression, what body language, what costume, what age will express this, finding the right voice for a given concept or idea. In thinking about it, there's several categories or themes that I have enjoyed expressing. One is the connection between generations. Another is religious personalities that I've done. Church lady series, wearing their hats and gloves. It was during a time when a lady did not consider herself fully dressed without a hat and gloves. And a whole series of paintings dealing with the charm and the innocence of children. I've also done a series of blackface. I tied to it the poem of Maya Angelou, and so I rise, and so I overcome, so to speak. And I see the blackface as a compromise for the moment, but had the strength to rise above. So often, for reasons of the social climate of today or then, we are not on the radar, and having the right representation, having the right exposure is part of pursuing inclusion. Harlem on a Mind show was held at the Metropolitan Museum. The problem was not the quality of the show per se. The problem was the organization. There was no African American participation in its organization. And so a lot of concern grew out of that, and a lot of offended people responded accordingly. I love teaching. It forces an expansion. One story I often tell in talking about, or trying to reflect how much I like to teach, is I tell the story of the time that I explained this lesson the first time and no one understood it. I explained it the second time and no one understood it. I explained it the third time and I understood it. And it forces a certain range you might not ever experience until you have to try. There's a certain level of enthusiasm or a certain level of spirit that you try to encourage. And I think of a story that I heard many years ago where the fox is running after the rabbit, and the rabbit outruns him. Mr. Bear says to Mr. Fox, "You must be getting old. I saw that rabbit outrun you." Fox said, "No, you understand. I was running for a meal. He was running for his life." And I would encourage anyone moving in our community to play the game as though there was no plan B and that you're running for your life and not for a meal.
Good afternoon again, and welcome, panelists. I'm really happy to see you. How are you all?
Great, thank you.
You hear us all right?
Yes, you all look wonderful.
Thank you, thank you.
And good afternoon to everyone who has made the time to listen, learn, and participate in our panel discussion. But before we begin, I'd really like to thank, on behalf of myself and the panelists, Joyous Pierce from the Harlem Arts Alliance for inviting us to participate in their vision and shared mission to educate and nurture the development of informed collectors in conjunction with Christie's Say It Loud exhibition, which comes from the call and response music tradition that requires a response. So say it loud, true to this tradition, I have to say, and I think we all have to say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. But before I introduce our illustrious panelists, in order for us to begin to talk about legacy seriously and what it means, we must acknowledge a series of events that shaped and served as a catalyst for legacy building in general and the market for Black visual culture in particular. So when it comes to the history and commerce of Black visual culture, we cannot ignore a shameful legacy of elitism, racism, and ignorance within the art world, among dealers, appraisers, curators, critics, collectors, and auction houses that perpetuated the ideas that were used to justify enslaving Africans in North, South, Central America, Europe, Australia, and the Caribbean. Specifically, the people of African descent were subhuman, unintelligent, and only good for breeding and labor. Hence the idea of artists of African descent being able to embrace complex ideas and concepts essential to making fine art or telling worthwhile narratives was an impossible notion in the minds of many, as evidenced by an 1867 article in the New York Herald, which states, "The Negro seems to have an appreciation for art, while being manifestly unable to produce it." Clearly, this statement influenced the perception of a lack of value and systematically marginalized and minimized the social and economic worth of fine art produced by Black artists in the United States for the last 153 years until recently. It also reinforced painfully stereotypical and derogatory images of the coon, mammy, buck, sambo, pickaninny, and blackface characters portrayed in subservient roles and mocking caricatures from Aunt Jemima at Breakfast to the 1930s Little Rascals, Shirley Temple and the Littlest Rebel, Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd in blackface on Saturday morning TV, and to Uncle Ben staring from the cupboard, all reinforced the demeaning representations of African Americans created to promote a false narrative of white supremacy. The promotion of this ideal perpetuated the systemic suppression and suffocation of the Black being. For many African American people of African descent, these images evoke an arc of emotions, including anger, sadness, confusion, hurt, invisibility, and shame. This is one of the many reasons the work of Robert Carter and the artists he mentions in the film we just saw, Charles White, Sam Gilliam, Bob Thompson, and Ed Hamilton, are significant to American history because they, as Black artists, saw and defined themselves, simultaneous to creating an aesthetic legacy of beauty, pride, self-awareness, value, and talent that reflected on a reality that has made an impact on generations of artists and collectors. James Brown's song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, was released 4 months after his historic 1968 concert in Boston, where his presence helped calm the riots following the assassination of Martin Luther King. The historic legacy of James Brown's song provides the foundation for the curatorial thread of Christie's Say It Loud exhibition, curated by Destinee Ross-Sutton, an emerging curator about international, emerging, and mid-career Black artists. In his autobiography, Godfather of Soul, James Brown reflects and states, "You should not have to tell people what race you are, and you shouldn't have to tell them to be proud. It was necessary to teach pride then, and I think the song did a lot of good for a lot of people. That song scared people too. Many white people didn't understand it. People called black and proud to them meant militant and angry, maybe because of the line about dying on your feet instead of living on your knees. But really, if you listen to it, it sounds like a children's song. That is why I had children in it, so children who heard it could grow up feeling pride." I was one of those children who first heard that song when I was 7 years old, and it reminded me that I had every reason to feel good about myself, despite not being treated in a manner commensurate with the content of my character, but solely based on false narratives and images about who I am, based on the color of my skin. It also reminded me that standing up for justice for humanity is essential for a healthy society. The legacy of beauty and value is reflected in the current exhibition at Christie's, with work by artists from the United States, Europe, and Africa who are making statements about identity, self-love, and Black consciousness. With that said, there are many streams to one ocean. So legacy is born within a passion, a vision, a community of people with ideas, dreams, and determination to exist and make a difference. Legacy is defined by anything handed down from the past, from an ancestor or a predecessor. Legacy is not bound by age or time, but legacy can intersect as a continuum of focus and purpose. The legacy of necessity is a legacy of purpose, and this is precisely what created Black art history and commerce. This legacy is extremely important for any serious collector of Black visual culture to know, so they have context and substantive insight behind their acquisitions. It begins with a man named James Porter, an artist, curator, professor, and mentor. He asked critics why the artists from the Harlem Renaissance did not receive critical acclaim. And he was told because Negroes had not been in America long enough to have an art history. So he wrote the classic book, Modern Negro Art, in 1943, which was the first African-American art history book, and he established the field of African-American art history in academia. I'm sorry I don't have a copy of the book to show you. I just don't have a copy at this location in my library, but I wanted you to see it. But you can look it up, and I recommend that you add it to your library. Continuing the legacy of necessity, 33 years later, in 1976, former student of James Porter, David C. Driscoll, an artist, a professor, an archivist, a historian, a collector, a critic, and mentor, published 2 centuries of Black American art in conjunction with a traveling exhibition that affirmed that Black artists not only had a history in the United States, but a documented artistic presence for 200 years. And this is what the cover of that publication looks like. 2 years later, Dr. Samela Lewis, the first African-American woman to earn a doctorate in fine art and art history in 1951, and the founder of the Museum of African-American Art in Los Angeles, with a group of academic, business, and community leaders, wrote African-American Art and Artists. 19 years later, in 1997, Dr. Richard Powell, a distinguished professor at Duke University, also an artist, wrote Black Art, A Cultural History, which places an emphasis on Black cultural themes rather than Black identity to define Black art history within an interdisciplinary context. take note that these trailblazers were also artists, and they realized that it is not, if they did not define and document their history, that their existence would not be known, and there would be, and false narratives about their cultural history would continue to perpetuate the myth that their culture began with slavery instead of from great African civilizations. In 1998, this publication, African American Art by Sharon Patton, is a comprehensive study of African American art history, discussed within the specific canon of the overall American art and its history. In the same year, in 1998, Collecting African American Art, Works on Paper and Canvas, was the first book to validate collecting painting, prints, and photography as viable assets and commodities in the marketplace. It reinforced the historic value of Black visual culture and showed you how to collect it as a formed collector. Between 1998 and 2005, the publication went into 6 reprints and was used as a membership incentive on PBS in conjunction with Jocelyn Wainwright, who was the founder of the National Black Fine Art Show, which was the first art fair to promote Black visual culture. And together, we cultivated and educated the market for Swan Galleries to open the first African American auction category. And this is Collecting African American Art, Works on Paper and Canvas. These are 6 books produced in the 20th century. There were hundreds of catalogs and brochures because there were exhibitions that were being held all over the country. But these were 6 books that were published within the 20th century that were specifically documenting and reaffirming the history and the value of African American in particular, but also Black visual culture at large. This is the collective and communal legacy that created the foundation for African American art history and collecting Black visual culture. Contrary to many recent articles, this did not happen overnight. It took 153 years to dispel the statement that artists are manifestly unable to produce art, and 22 years since the release of Collecting African American Art for the market to catch up. So now that we have a clear understanding of why Black legacies matter, our panel will address legacy from 3 perspectives. First, Heather Carter will address the responsibility of legacy for a child of an artist who is also a collector and an art advisor, followed by Curly Holton, who is not only an acclaimed artist and master printmaker, as executive director, he will address institutional leadership and what it means to preserve the legacy of David C. Driscoll through the David C. Driscoll Center for the Study of Visual Art and Culture of African Americans and the African diaspora. And last but not least, we have a new Harlem-based art dealer named Dodji Gbedemah, and he will discuss the relevance of Harlem's history to his vision for his gallery and collectors. So without further ado, I would like to speak with Heather at this point and ask Heather to tell us briefly a little bit about yourself, and then talk a little bit about the legacy that you are responsible for and what it means to you as a daughter of an artist.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And thank you, Halima, for that wonderful introduction, setting the stage for this panel discussion. And a quick thank you to Joyous and Christie's. And it's really an honor to be part of this very significant event. My name is Heather Carter, and that was my dad in the video. And every time I see that video, I get chills. My appreciation for him as an artist continues to grow. He does not use any images, or usually doesn't use any images, for all the work that was displayed and all the work that he does. For me, in terms of legacy and preserving my dad's legacy, that is a calling. I had corporate jobs for over 30 years, and I recently left to pursue my passion, which is preserving my dad's legacy and elevating artists of color, specifically African American artists, who remain under the radar and unrecognized and undervalued. And it is my life's mission, really, to shine a light on these artists.
So could you tell us a little bit about the artists that you are promoting and placing in collections, and how you approach the conversation, if at all, with your collectors about legacy in terms of what it means?
Sure. So Barry Youssef, who you saw earlier, is an artist in my artist family. I consider my artists in my group part of an extended family. And in terms of collecting and how I approach collecting with respect to legacy, I'm very particular about the work of my dad's that's released and that I keep in the family. I have at least one piece, a lot of times more, of each of the artists who are in my group. I put my money where my mouth is, and it's all about building a collector base for my artists and putting them on the map. So I make sure that they are very much a part of my collection. I also have a lot of interest in artists from my dad's generation, octogenarian artists. And so a few of my favorite artists who I have in my collection are James Denmark, Otto Niels, Wadsworth Jarrell, just to name a few. Lastly, in terms of how I deal with the collectors and my clients, is I encourage them, obviously, to pay attention to the emerging artists, but also to not forget, some of the artists who have been around for a long time and who are living and quite talented. So I want to make sure my clients have a range of work from artists who are emerging through mid-career and late career. So that's important to me.
Thank you very much, Heather.
Thank you.
I'd like to turn it over to you, Curly, and ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and of course, talk about what you are doing and the importance of legacy and the way in which what David Driscoll has done and what is happening at the David Driscoll Center.
Sure. Well, as Halima mentioned, I am a practicing artist. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes. Practicing artist. I've been a master printmaker for many years and worked with artists like Sam Gilliam, Faith Ringo, William T. Williams, and a wide range of noted artists. And I became the director of the David C. Driscoll Center in 2012. It was established in 2001 to honor the legacy of David C. Driscoll, who was considered the foremost authority of African American art. And Halima mentioned that he had been a student of James Porter. So the center was established to celebrate his legacy and to recognize and embrace artists of the diaspora and to create an intellectual home for those artists. So in establishing the center, we have over 3,000 art objects in our permanent collection. We have the personal papers, photographs, and library of Dr. Driscoll. Now that's important, not just because it reveals and documents his existence and his practice, but it tells the story of the African-American journey through the visual arts. The documentation of his seminal exhibition, 200 Years of African-American Art, We have the sketches of the layout of the exhibition. We have his personal notes and how he developed his strategy for the exhibition. So again, it's not just David Driscoll, it is our story as African Americans and as Americans. David had a habit of saying, although he was telling a story of African Americans, it was about the larger story of America. And you said something early in your introduction, Halima, that struck me. You said a lot of this came out of necessity. I find it interesting that James Porter was a practicing artist that also had to teach African American art. David Driscoll was a practicing artist that taught African American art. I taught African American art history at Lafayette College as an endowed professor, first as a practicing artist, and it reveals how there were so few scholars in the area to really teach the material that it was artists that were teaching. To illustrate this, when I studied at the Cleveland Institute of Art, there was one catalog on the shelf in the library, and it was a very slim catalog of Elizabeth Catlett. Now, Huey Lee Smith was a graduate of the Cleveland Institute of Art, but none of his work was in that library. So the first book that I actually saw that inspired me as an artist was James Porter's book. And I still have his book. I borrowed it from a friend. I never returned it. But in that book was a famous painting by Palmer Hayden, a janitor who paints. At that time, I was working as a janitor to get through school. So here I see this image that says that I can do this. So I think the legacy has a lot to do with a foundation and a possibility. If you see someone else doing it, you can believe in the possibility. Well, we got to be very careful about that because some of those legacies are foundations. Some of those legacies are in some ways dysfunctional. What I mean by that, a lot of the art that was made during the Harlem Renaissance and after is more about a redemptive motive than anything else, to redeem ourselves from the shame of slavery, to present a new Negro, to turn Negro presentation into a marketable object. I think we have to be careful about the nostalgia element of it. So the David C. Driscoll Center is a place that has a large exhibition space, 3,000 square feet. So we do 2 major exhibitions a year. We do panel discussions, seminars. We do performance pieces, large exhibitions of sculpture. So it's a very dynamic place. And one thing that's important about it, there are a lot of things that's important about it, only visual arts research center in this entire world dedicated to the study of African American art, named after an African American artist, period. And of course, you know the David C. Driscoll Prize that's given out each year at the High Museum to both an artist and art historian. Each year they rotate. It is the only art prize named after an African American artist that is given to African American artists and art historians. So you see, it's not just about the legacy and the foundation. It's about transformation. It's about impacting the future. It's about taking this conversation into the future and expanding that conversation. In your father's film, Heather, there's a reference to Sam Gilliam and Bob Thompson. These artists were not merely African American artists. Their visual language was much broader than that. They were doing aesthetic investigation. Sam Gilliam is the most erudite and most intelligent individual that I've ever met and talked to. His knowledge is so broad, and his body of work is not merely the work of an African American, but the work of a genius. So we got to keep in mind about how we present the body of the African American to the public to be consumed by the public, and we're still doing that. It's almost like the Harlem Renaissance all over again. We have to be mindful that we have to expand this sense of humanity. So I'm going to close by saying, I've been thinking about David Driscoll. I think about him a lot. He passed in April. He was a victim of the COVID virus. It's a tragic loss. And so I think about him often, and I think about what he was really about. And he did something that I believe was amazing. He brought a sense of artistic genius to the broader American community. especially the African American community. And by doing that, he expanded not only their appreciation of art, but he expanded their humanity. So he gave a sense of humanity, richness, and broadness to the African American community, and Bearden did the same thing. So I'll stop at this moment.
Well, thank you so much, Curly. You know, I have to say that when we talk about legacy, one of the things that is very important to keep in mind is the impact and the value of community. And you really have an opportunity to experience and see that at the Driscoll Center when you go through the archives. I mean, not only is there art and there's exhibitions, but there's the library. It is so extensive because David was also, Driscoll was a voracious reader, and he was engaged and involved in every aspect of art from all over the world and throughout the African diaspora. But I will
and I'll just go through it, rummage through it during the day. And it's amazing. I came across a card written by Langston Hughes to David, greeting David and telling how much he appreciated what he did. A letter from Elizabeth Catlett with little doodles around the border of the letter and asking, please get that payment from the commission she did. So you see, history is made, it's brought to life for us. And I think that's very critical. So Halima, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, it's fine because, you know, because what I was just going to say something like that too, that when you go through the archive, you really see the relationships, the importance of relationships and the importance of the community among the artists. And the one thing that I think is important for a lot of the contemporary artists to realize that the community of artists is really important. And a lot of the artists throughout the 20th century, and even of certain generations even now, who are not younger artists or emerging artists, they would go into each other's studios and they would have aesthetic discourses and philosophical discourses. And one of the challenges and sad things is that a lot of younger contemporary artists do not visit each other's studios out of a fear that someone's going to take a picture and put it on Instagram and get credit, you know, for the aesthetic. And I know that they have more than one idea. But what I'm concerned about in terms of legacy is the coming together of artists to even talk about different aesthetic movements, you know, like, you know, the Spiral group that, you know, with Bearden and Richard Mayhew and Emma Amos and a host of people, or even the group of people from Africobra, which when they created an aesthetic of a Kool-Aid palette, and it was a political statement in which the aesthetic did not include the color, you know, the pigment of white paint in their painting, and it was supposed to be about bringing the culture together and optimism and hope and beauty. These are movements that came about with artists coming together and really talking about aesthetics and the politics and the social issues. And you see that in a lot of the correspondence between David Driscoll and artists and administrators and curators. And you can even hear audio recordings of him with James Porter. I mean, I had read James Porter's work, heard about him, and I never heard his voice. And when I heard his voice on a recording, the hair stood, you know, straight up on my arm, because I really appreciated the gift and the struggle and the sacrifice of what he and so many others have done to lead us to this point in history where the work is being collected and filling the historic and aesthetic gaps in specific American art collections, as well as other collections of Black visual culture. And this is very, very important, which is why I really wanted people to understand that within up until the end of the 20th century, there were really only a handful of books. Now, 20 years into this century, there are hundreds of books, and the scholarship, as you had mentioned earlier, Curly, has grown exponentially. We have so many different scholars, great brilliance, someone like Dr. Kelly Jones, comes to mind, who is just brilliant. She was a brilliant curator. She's a brilliant scholar. And there's a whole list, and the work of Deborah Willis as well, Dr. Deborah Willis, and Mary Schmidt Campbell, and there's just so many. And but I just wanted to emphasize the importance of the David Driscoll Center, especially in terms of legacy, but in terms of nurturing the development of future scholars, as well as being a springboard for artists that are meet the bar in terms of continuing a legacy aesthetically and historically. So I'd like to turn it over to Dodji Gbedemah. Are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. I just can't see you.
Oh. Can you see me now?
Yes, I can see you now. How are you?
Wow, fantastic.
So as you know, you're a new Harlem-based gallery, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about the gallery and what made you decide to open the gallery in Harlem, as well as some of the criteria that you have for the selection of artists and anything else that you'd like to share.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And I just wanted to say that I'm really honored to be on this platform. I will respectfully request that we have a part 2 or part 3 of this session, because we are learning so much from each other. And I just wanted to let people know, first of all, when we say Black Lives Matter, for me, it's like Black artists matter, Black galleries matter, Black dealers or art dealers matter, and so on and so forth. There was an interesting study in how you call it? I found it on the internet that talks about how out of the 1,500 galleries in New York City, we're talking about the 5 boroughs of New York City, there is less than 1% of Black-owned gallery. And I wanted to thank Mr. Curley so much when he said that representation matter. When you saw that janitor, when you were going to school and you saw that janitor artist that inspired you to do the same thing. And that's what we want to do here at Kente Royal Gallery. We want to be able to represent artists of the African diaspora. As we saw in the beginning of this session, there were young artists from Nigeria, like Baris Yusuf. We have young artists from South Africa, like Nelson Makomo. We have so much going on right now on the continent. And here in the US, there's so much creativity going on right now. And even in the Caribbean and Latin America, where everyone of African descent is doing some phenomenal stuff. So we wanted to be a place where all of that can converge, where we can have true representation of what it is to produce Black art, and go from there, basically, and have Harlem Renaissance 2.0. So we established Kente Royal Gallery a year ago this month, and it has been a success from the beginning. And even with COVID, 4 months of not opening during COVID, we are still here. We just opened up a new group exhibit, which started with a bang, where we have artists such as DeMarcus McCaughey, and we have William Porter. We have a bunch of young artists that are doing amazing things or part of the group. So I invite all of you to come through and check out what we're doing here at Kente Royal Gallery. Our legacy, I know Halima asked me this question so many times, our legacy here at Kente Royal Gallery should be that in 10 years, we have mentored, sponsored, and educated such a group of young artists of the African diaspora that there will be an overwhelming group of them that are doing amazing things all over the world of art.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you've shared, and I would be remiss not to address the issue of Black-owned art dealers and galleries, because there has also been a lot of misinformation in the press about the very existence of Black art dealers and galleries, as if all of the sudden these artists have been discovered, and hey, where are the Black dealers and galleries? It makes me think of, the whole story of Christopher Columbus, and he came and they discovered people that already existed. But the fact of the matter is that in 1997, well, prior to 1997, there have always been people who curated the work of Black artists. They did them in galleries. They created salon exhibitions in spaces in their homes, and they really were taking care of business. They had a willing buyer and a willing seller. They had a price, and the business took place. And this has been going on for decades. There have been art galleries, formal art galleries of Black dealers in the United States for, goodness gracious, more than 40 years. And when the National Black Fine Art Show opened at the Puck Building in New York City in 1997, there was a lot of negative press about the art fair. And a lot of the negative press was based on preconceived ideas about artists of African descent. And there was a lot of pushback. Why do you have to have an art fair that's just focused on Black artists? Well, it's important to realize that artists of African descent, no matter where they are in the world, want to be known as artists, good artists, more than artists based on the melanin in their skin. It is not the artists who have segregated themselves from the mainstream market. It is extremely important for people in the art world to get that fact clear. Very important in order for the market to continue to develop, because just as people of African descent are not a monolithic group of people, artists of African descent have such intellectual and creative diversity in terms of the mediums that they work with, whether they're figurative, conceptual, abstract, performative, whatever it is that they're working on to express their ideas visually and to make poignant statements about the world in which we live in. It's different. And I invite everyone to reflect upon that. When you think of ancient civilizations, the only thing that's left to tell you about the people is the art and the technology. And the artists represent the visual conscience of the time in which they live. And so just as we had artists in ancient Egypt and the lost city of Pompeii and the Aztecs and the Mayans, today the contemporary artists represent the visual conscience of the time in which they are living and working. So back to the dealers, because this is important. At the National Black Fine Art Show, you had more than 100 dealers from all over the United States and the Caribbean representing artists of African descent. And you had a handful of dealers who were not of African descent, but who were committed to exhibiting and selling and promoting quality American art or Caribbean art. They were looking at aesthetics. They were looking at talent. They were not looking at the color of the artist's skin, as the majority of the 57th Street galleries and Soho galleries, many who have moved to Chelsea, who in the 80s did not show any of the artists that they are now showing. And it's important to know that these galleries have existed. There were 45 Black-owned galleries in 1998 when I published Collecting African American Artworks on Paper and Canvas. And as the whole art ecosystem shifted due to the impact of the art fair business model, which has hurt many dealers across the board, small galleries, art brokers. You know, if you cannot afford to participate in these expensive fairs, it really it is very difficult for a lot of these businesses to remain intact. And it really dramatically impacted a lot of the Black-owned galleries. And it's not because of bad business. It's just that the business model was structured in a very different way, and the kind of resources, economic, and then also in terms of the way that the various relationships, in terms of how the collective activity of the art world functions, those relationships between the artists and the dealers and the collectors and the critics and the curators and, you know, the appraisers and the academics, all of that also was a variable in the demise of many of the galleries. But it is important to know that in addition to the historic legacy of not only cultural production and the documentation of African American artists, there has been a legacy of curators, there have been a legacy of art dealers, there have been a legacy of framers, there have been a legacy of Black conservators, there is a legacy of every arts professional, of people of color and of African descent that have cultivated and nurtured the development of Black diasporic visual culture. So I think this is a very important point for many people that are on this call to keep in mind, because a lot of the press that in the last couple of years has been it's misinformed information. It's not accurate.
Thank you so much. As a matter of fact, there was an article published in the New York Times on June 20th, an article that asked the question, why has not been any great Black gallery? The art world is an ecosystem. It takes all of us to make it work. You know, it takes the artists, it takes the galleries, the dealers, it takes the big institutions, it takes all of us, the collectors, the buyers, the producers, the managers. It takes a whole lot of people to make the whole thing work. So that's why I will keep saying that Black galleries do matter, and we really need to do the work of supporting them. RT did a quick survey the other day, and they came up with, I think, 27 Black-owned gallery. And again, they didn't do their due diligence. They just kind of like pick stuff up here and there from the internet and threw it out there. So we need someone to go out there and do the work and gather all this information and present it through data so we can see where we are hurting. 1% of us cannot really fight against the 99% of the dominant culture. But yes, we are here, we are committed to do the work to represent the underrepresented artists.
Which is essential. And I have to say that it's important to note that there are different levels of art galleries in terms of different levels of business practicum, just like there are different levels of artists practicum. So, you know, there are dealers who have brick and mortar galleries, and they also participate in the art fairs. And as a result of the art fair ecosystem and how art fairs are being used to develop cities and places that people normally wouldn't go to all over the world, the few people of color and of African descent who are present are the ones that are getting the primary attention. And if that's all that they're seeing, then that's all that they believe exists. It's, you know, which is sort of like the time when people would walk outside and say, the earth is flat, but they didn't go further, you know, to discover that, no, there's another horizon, there's another vista to explore. A lot of the smaller galleries and the brokers, do not be fooled. I know there's a lot of collectors who are on this call. Do not be fooled by the window dressing. Many of the dealers, you know, they're not just selling, you know, a couple of $100 and a couple of $1,000 pieces of work. There are millions of dollars worth of work that are being sold and put in institutional collections and private collections, and it's important to take advantage of lesser known galleries in terms of being able to have access. One thing I do want to touch upon a little bit with you, Dodji, as well as Curly and Heather, is that historically, when it's come to Black artists, there tends to be a much more greater emphasis on the promotion of male artists. And it's very important that that women artists are also included and considered, not because of their gender, but just for those opportunities to be there in the collections, in the exhibitions. And also it's very important that different ideas about identity and gender and sexual politics and issues of colonization and history and beauty are integrated into the different aesthetics that are exhibited and presented to collectors and museum curators and to auction houses, so that the plethora of diverse aesthetics is also equally represented, so versus one more than the other. And I think you have an artist, Althea, oh my goodness, Althea Brown? I'm sorry, Alethea Brown, right? But can you just, talk a little bit about that in terms of your vision, in terms of the legacy, in terms of how inclusive it is? Because, people, corporations talk about equity and inclusion, and it has to be more than window dressing in every sphere of the art world. We have to talk about substantive work, professionals, and a collective community of art professionals of all backgrounds and sensibilities, but also within the Black diaspora community, to make sure that the narratives and the due diligence in terms of the research is done appropriately.
Absolutely. I am so glad you brought this up, because we made it a point to make sure that we open up the gallery with a female artist. One of my good friend and fellow Abyssinian member, her name is Gabrielle Baker. She helped us open up Kente Royal Gallery. She had her first solo exhibit here, which lasted over 2 months. And she came from the Sam Gilliam type of environment. And she was always talking about the fact that, first of all, she's a female, she's African-American, and she does abstract work. So just like Sam Gilliam. So it's like she had all the cards stacked up against her, and nobody would give her a platform. So we're like, okay, we're gonna take up this challenge. And we opened up the gallery with Gabrielle Baker, and guess what? It was amazing. It was very successful. We sold so many of her pieces, and she's still in this group show with me right now, and I think she's going to be one of the staple of this gallery. I also have Alethea Brown join us, the group show. She had an exhibit earlier in February. I went to see her, and she does phenomenal work. I mean, her work is so amazing, and I want her to be part of my a group of artists as well. There is another young female artist. Her name is Daryl Mentia Daniels. She's from Cincinnati, but she moved to New York City. She went to Yale, got her MFA there, and she's doing amazing work, but she has not gotten a chance to get a solo exhibit yet. So I want to have a solo exhibit here. She sent me Breonna Taylor's, one of her portrait of Breonna Taylor. So beautiful, which is part of the exhibit right now. So again, if you get a chance, come and see us, come and see this piece. So yes, we have to push our female artists. We have to represent them. We have to give them the opportunity, and not to forget our very own Joyous Pierce, who is an artist on her own right. So I'm waiting for the day I will have her piece in here as well.
Okay, thank you. Before we have a few more minutes, I just want to go to Heather and then close with you, Curly. Heather, could you talk a little bit about the different artists and your criteria for selecting them?
Sure. So I have in my artist family about 12. artists at this point, and again, ranging from early career to late career artists, including my dad. I do strive for a nice balance, by gender. And I think I have about 4 or 5 female artists. And I'm always looking for new, wonderful talent. So I did a show, I curated a show about a year and a half ago called Ode to She. And I had Anne Tanksley's work in that show. I'm trying to think of I had another female artist in that, a couple of other female artists in that show too. But that was a tribute to women. So that is very much, on my mind and integrated in all that I do.
Okay. This is good. And Curly, the collection at the Driscoll Center is so extraordinary, and in terms of the broad range of aesthetics, mediums. It's just a first-rate collection. But I just, as a master printmaker, and you can't really say that about a lot of printmakers, that, this is not a word that I'm using or any of the artists that have worked with Curly use lightly. You've worked with a lot of artists. You have seen an extraordinary range of talent. You're an artist. You have this extraordinary personal collection as well as the collection at the Driscoll Center. Could you just talk a little bit about, just the range of aesthetic and what you've noticed in terms of the sensibilities that you're seeing among male and female artists that are being collected?
Sure. Historically in America, the art world has been primarily a male-dominated practice. Although there are very creative women artists that were in the background, the market has embraced, especially the white male, before it's embraced anyone else. So it's endemic to the whole history of American art. I've talked to Faith Ringo, who talks about it with great passion and hostility toward the world that has denied her for so long. So she's gotten a lot of retribution back with her success now. So she's survived all of them and it's beaten all of them. We did a publication for the Metropolitan Museum of Art of one of Faith's pieces. And she was so proud because it was the most popular selling piece in the Met Gallery. She had outsold Rauschenberg, Lichtenstein, Stella. So she was so proud of this. But there's a challenge with that. And our African American artists are still competing with this in terms of market access and pricing. We know this. This is quite a bit of a challenge. But what we try to do at the Driscoll Center is balance that. So we look at female artists as much as we look at male artists. We do studio visits. We acquire works. We've acquired works by Alison Sarr and a whole range of other artists. Delita Martin, Vanessa German. We had an exhibition, one-person exhibition arranged for Vanessa German, but because of COVID, we had to postpone it. She's a phenomenal artist that we actually gave her first opportunity to present her work at the Driscoll Center some years ago. So we sort of take credit for discovering her. So the Driscoll Center provides this kind of opportunity for the showcasing of the work, for the acquiring of the work. We purchase work all year long by young artists, by established artists. We have funds that have been given to us for acquisition by very notable people, including Oprah Winfrey has given us a significant gift to acquire works by young African American artists. So that's a mission and a passion. David Driscoll was a great collector of African American art. So we continue that tradition. And what we've done with my workshop is also, I was trained at Bob Blackburn's in New York City. Some of you may have heard of the workshop, the printmaking workshop in New York City. But I studied with Bob. Bob was the master printer for Romare Bearden and a whole host of other artists. But when you look at that tradition, there's only been 3 African-American noted master printmakers. That has been Bob Blackburn, Ron Adams, who printed the beautiful print by Charles White. That was the first print. The print, I can't think of the title, Halima, but it has the
It has the shell with the arms open. Yes, yes. I can't remember that print either.
Yeah, and then the third would be myself as a trained African-American master printmaker. Currently, I own and operate the only publishing house in the country by an African-American, owned by an African-American. So the reason I'm pointing that out is not to sing my praises, but to say we are still at the beginning of this. We're standing at the base of the oak tree. We're not at the top of the tree. We're just starting to get our arms around this. And we have to be mindful of it. We do a collector's school every year at the Driscoll Center. And we have about 30 participants. And we have artists that do presentations. We have investment counselors. We have lawyers talk about estate. We talk about archiving work, about caring for work. And we do a presentation called Collecting Smart Art. The first time we did that, the whole audience, they didn't understand what it meant to buy smart art. I said, well, it's like literature. We know when we read a great book. You know, we know when someone writes well. It's the same with visual arts. We need to look for smart art and to give artists that are producing important work the platform that they deserve. Although the market is now paying attention to us, Sam Gilliam didn't need that market to survive as an artist. He was extremely successful. I didn't need that market to survive as an artist, that dominant culture market that so many young Black artists are pursuing desperately. Our community has provided support for a lot of these artists.
Yes.
Curating started out, I would go to shows at private homes in Detroit, as Halima spoke about the first gallery shows, exhibitions. We're in private homes with private collectors. So we have a community, we have a network, and we need to harvest, nurture and harvest from that network as much as we can.
Thank you so much, Curly. And I thank you, Dodji and Heather. This has been a wonderful afternoon. We could talk for hours. We all have so many different stories and things to share. And it's really been wonderful to just scratch the surface of the importance of legacy as a community, and importance of legacy with a purpose, and the importance of nurturing the development of more artists of African descent in art schools and through galleries and in the collections of major collectors and institutions. And I just really want to close and just invite everyone to continue to discover new and exciting things about yourself through art. And naturally, as a collector, no matter what kind of a collector you are, because collectors collect for different reasons. Some people, it's a hobby. They love the activity and the interaction with the artist. Some collect to decorate their home or their office. Some people collect simply because they want to keep up with the Joneses. Other people collect because they just can't help themselves. And people move around from, one phase or stage all the time. But, once you're acquiring these works, these are assets. The business of it is that the art becomes an asset and a commodity. And it's important once you've acquired work to take care of the work and make sure it's framed properly and in locations in your home where light will not damage it and all of those different things. Because you as a collector are also the protector of this legacy. And it's your responsibility as well. So most art collectors, as you know, are simultaneously bibliophiles. And so, make sure that you start to develop, if you don't already have, a series of books from the 19th century to the present on various perspectives and views about Black visual culture, the artists, the movements within an art historical context, as well as artist monographs. And I'm going to close right now and thank you, panelists, for sharing your experience and your expertise and your time. And I want to thank everyone who has tuned into this particular panel for making the time to be here. And if there are any questions, we're happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Halima.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Halima. Thank you, Dodji. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Curly. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon, wherever you find yourself again in the world. We would like to express gratitude, really sincere gratitude for the artists who joined us today. Destinee, for your perseverance and vision in Say It Loud in this exhibition. Dodji, Robert, Heather, and both Halima and Stephanie for guiding us through time, space, and histories effortlessly today. DJ Spinna, you took us to another plane and then you brought us back, so thank you. Today we have witnessed a coming together spanning continents, time zones, and ideologies. As Curly so perfectly put it, it has been a moment for deep aesthetic investigation and community. In the 17-year journey of the Harlem Arts Alliance, we have witnessed many resurgences of consciousness in this industry and across all arts and culture industries. But we hope that these conversations will not be the end of the discourse, but a continuation of the legacies we find ourselves deeply immersed in. And as Halima said, another horizon for us all. For more information about each of the panelists, each of the artists, and the Harlem Arts Alliance, please check out our website, check out our social media, that's harlemaa.org, and HAA Community on Instagram. And we encourage you to create your own discourse via social media. And thank you again for submitting your questions during this conversation as well. That's it for us. Thank you for joining us for this Artist Talk and Consortium. Thank you, Christie's, for hosting us on your platform. And thank you all for making the time to be present today. We truly appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone
We appreciate all the work you're doing too. Thank you.